Dear audience, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that this podcast is monetized, and thank you personally for putting up with what is likely quite redundant advertising. Forgive the nature of the beast, but such are the ways of online monetization. I humbly thank you. And now, for today's Nugget of Zen. In response to the question, what is Zen? Alan Watts is quoted as saying the following: Zen is a liberation from time. There is no time other than this instant. Past, future, abstractions without any concrete reality. Until this has become clear, it seems that our life is all past and future, the present nothing more than a hairline that divides them. By, quote, awakening to the instant, one sees that the reverse is true. Past and future are fleeting illusions. The present is eternally real. Alan Watts. Welcome to the here and now. For those of you who may not be familiar with the name, Alan Watts is a renowned authority in the explicit sense of the word on all things Buddhism/Zen. Considered a modern philosopher and communicator of clear, insightful analysis of Buddhist and Zen dogma/culture/practices. He's currently somewhat famous on YouTube. Posthumously. Never quite sure how to pronounce that word, but it means after one's death. If you have not come across any of his audio recordings as commonly reposted on YouTube and other social media, it's worth it. Take a hot minute of your afternoon and check out a few. If you still love going to bookstores and or ordering books online, I must genuinely, authentically, not for any paid marketing reason, enthusiastically recommend The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, which should be available in paperback at your average, everyday, big box bookstore, and or vis-a-vis the interwebs. A life-changing read. I want to say that this is from that, but it might also be attributable to other sources, because Alan Watts wrote a lot and gave a lot of public speaking engagements in which he discoursed about these themes. Zen is explicitly and implicitly, overtly and subtly about abstraction and or the absence thereof. Abstraction is a almost intuitive mental cognitive process in which our mind recreates a thing and or an idea and presents itself reflexively a symbolic tool to represent that idea or object. This is not some insidious master plan thing that has been imposed upon us. It's just the way we operate. In fact, at a biological level, all that you know is actually almost pure abstraction. It's not as if your eyeballs are literal peephole portals to some seeing eyeball inside. It's an intervening electrochemical biofiltration process. You're taking input vis-a-vis the, quote, five senses, analyzing it at lightning speeds, and hyper-realistically 4D modeling it in your mind. That's just scientific fact. You may or may not have heard of that, but to the best of some theories, to the best of my understanding, some very strong theories about how the brain works represents the senses and the imagination in such a fashion, which is a curious thing, that imagination is encouraged in the youthful years of our childhood and then discouraged once we become functional adults, and is quite possibly one of the most powerful tools presented to us by reality, through which we passively and or actively can engage with reality. That's what Zen is about. Zen is the self-liberation of all the abstractions, including, but not limited to, the abstraction of one's own self, which, to be quite honest with you, dear friends, after some investigation, I can report to you personally, independent of anybody else's theory, that one's own personal self-abstraction is very cleverly arranged, metaphorically speaking, like a set of nesting dolls. Not to necessarily invoke a pop cultural reference to the show Russian Dolls, although if you've never seen it, thumbs up. Or if we're on a star system, 5 out of 5 stars. Epic show. I think there's only the one season. Worth binging on a date night. Not for kids. But I digress. That which is behind, beneath, before all abstraction, that is Zen. When you sit, no matter what tool, verbal, mental, physical, or otherwise, that you might utilize, and I'm not here to judge tools, I'm just saying there's various tools out there and they may not all work for you. But no matter which tool you're using, ultimately. And it's discouraged to speak of Zen in such terms. But it's ultimately the goal, with bunny ear quotes around it, to liberate oneself through the minute by minute, instant by instant abdication. I personally love to emphasize through forgiveness, through a word magic of forgiveness healing, if I may propose such an idea. And that through that conscious work, and it's a sort of wordless conscious work, it's about truly setting aside whatever is going on out there, whether that means friends and family, the four walls that you're staring at by yourself because you're in severe lockdown, cabin fever, your work that you have to Zoom to, whatever it was before COVID, setting it all aside with loving, forgiving compassion and saying, I will not focus on that. I will focus on my own internal deepest awareness and acknowledge that inside, in a very vivid and real but wordless way, these abstractions, including but not limited to the illusions of our past and the illusions of our anticipated future, and our own self-abstraction, right? The idea of ideas of ourself. Those things can be proverbially, metaphorically, allegorically, metaphysically set aside. Not destroyed, not burned to the ground, not ripped up to shreds, not rendered asunder. Just lovingly, compassionately, forgivingly set aside. One can think of it as like putting them on a special pedestal or place or receptacle so that they may heal. One practice encourages conceiving of the centralmost point in one's mind as a temple, right? If you just imagine this. And this is leaps and bounds away from what Alan Watts was literally talking about, but I'm sharing with you how I've come to apply it, right? If you think of the center of your phenomenological experience, and what is that? The very core of consumption, the very core of perception, the very center. If you perceive that as an intradimensional place, a room, inside of which the truest form of you, the most high, your soul, your higher self, etc., that's where that core of perception and manifestation resides. You can conceive of a temple as a room, and at the center of that room, an altar, and at the center of that altar, a receptacle or a vessel, a sacred place to put things and ideas and abstractions. Using the vivid imaginings of one's mind, one develops an internal practice of taking the distractionary thought that isn't worth writing down, it's a little annoying and is an ego trap wrapped up inside of real world facts that you're concerned about, putting it there at this temple, on this altar, in this special receptacle, and allowing it to be transmuted through compassionate, forgiving healing from that which you consider divine, which exists in the eternal now. It must, right? If there is such a thing as divinity, and it has half the things we attribute it to, most keenly, divine nature, omnipresence, and the sort of being the root source of it all, as well as, if you're following along with my own theory, the divinity, if it can be described as anything, is the source from which all that which is observed is made manifest from, and that which is observing, all that which is made manifest. And that, arguably, is the message of, quote, bunny ears, the Buddha, close bunny ears quote. Whoever that was, whether there was one guy in India or many people over many lifetimes across a sea of time, the message has been, in that description-free place, in that wordless, almost unimaginable, yet imaginable place that you can venture to deep within, behind, before, and free from all abstraction, one can, quote, awaken to the instant, end quote. It's worth noting here, and any longtime listeners may recall, that I've pointed out that phrases like awakening, woke, enlightenment are generally vaguely understood at best and grotesquely misunderstood at worst in Western culture. And we can put a pin in that because I'm sure I'll talk about it again in the future, but I've already addressed it in some past episode. I wish I had a breakdown of every episode and the subjects and themes that I cover so that I could, in moments like this, point you very handily to a specific episode. Alas, such is life that I cannot. But it's out there, so I encourage you to hop around and check it out. But back to our quote here with Alan Watts. The key thing is, if we understand the root source of words, right, then we won't get caught up in the misunderstandings of such terms. And I think these are pivotal. And I bring them up because they both directly and indirectly, I think, in my mind, relate to this quote in a sort of contextual way. But the Matrix. First misunderstanding about it. There are, by necessity, multiple matrices. Because that's one phrase, like snow, that literally refers to a wide array of phenomena. One limited phenomena, which is sort of the most common, general, understood use of the term that gets bandied about, in my experience, observing things on social media, is that of like the mental cage we've created for ourselves, or the social matrix, the mental norms and or controls imposed upon us since birth by society. But that alone is not the entirety and the totality of the meaning of the word. Thus, if we get caught up in misunderstanding that word, we get caught up in other misunderstandings. If one comes to a realization, has an epiphany, maybe even a divinely inspired vision about this social network construct, this real-term materialist idea-driven ideation, and calls it the matrix and limits its understanding to that matrix, and you realize it, you might fall to the ego trap of thinking you're enlightened. You are, to a degree, more enlightened than you were so just moments ago. Yes. Have you achieved Buddhahood? No, dear friends, you have not. And therein lies how we get caught up in ego traps in spiritual culture, in spiritual society, in spiritual businesses, in spiritual trends and, pop culture, as it were. Spiritual people are not free of ego trap risk just by virtue of having slapped on the term and having picked up a practice or two. In fact, as one source points out, and this is an excellent, I don't want to call it a product because it's given away for free, but there's definitely sort of an artist's, craftsperson's business around it. But Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, that's like a 4 or 5 part initial documentary that covers a lot of ground and is really worth watching if you've never seen it. There's a sequel to it. And I always blank on the name, but it's right there at the Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds page on YouTube. It's the sequel. If you type in Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds 2, you'll find it. But they hit you with the sort of, at first, a little depressing realization that externalized spiritual practices, praying with beads, doing yoga, if you do them right, they work. If you're just a little bit off, they're just another ego activity. They're just another acquisition tool, because more is never enough, and you want more self-improvement. You want more enlightenment, quote unquote, as product or as result. But back to my clarification, the misunderstanding is that there is no one set of activities that will, in a guaranteed fashion, facilitate you or provide you with ultimate enlightenment. There's evidence that there is such a thing to strive towards, but then that's ego trap, right? Because more is never enough, and we shouldn't be making it about that. It shouldn't be a goal, it shouldn't be an achievement, it shouldn't be a personal badge of pride, etc. What is happening, though, is that it's an unstoppable phenomena, enlightenment. It's a birthright. It's like when a sunflower, it doesn't matter when, how, where, or why, when a sunflower sees the sun, pardon the personification. I know they don't have eyeballs and they don't have neural network tissue, at least we don't think they do, although plants are very capable of expressing consciousness. That's a whole nother episode. When a sunflower sees the sun, boom, it turns to the sun. If you put it inside with fixed lighting, it looks at the strongest source of fixed lighting. If you move the lighting inside a controlled situation, it will move around and look at it. Just does, right? Life evolves. Frogs don't decide to explore their evolutionary options like some sort of dating game. They just evolve. They survive and they adapt. And so it's not survival of the fittest, right? It's survival of those most tolerant to and adaptable around change. Because the one constant in our material womb illusion is change. Now, there are other levels to the meaning of these words. If you dig deep into matrix, and I believe Alan Watts talks about this in his book, The Way of Zen, but it's also something that I encountered on my own, right? And it's a realization that needs to be had by many, many, many more people, in my humble opinion, because it's a powerful realization. The root word of the term matrix is mother, mother womb, progenitor, in the bringing forth of life sort of way. It's also the root term for matter itself. Now, we don't think of rocks as being animate objects that need something to give birth to them, and yet rocks don't come from a rock store. Rocks don't exist independent of their context, and there is a very intriguing, fascinating, slow motion, long scale alchemical process that gives birth to every rock you'll ever come across, that has already given birth to them, right? If Buddha discovered anything, for there's many quote attributed to the Buddha, and one of my favorites is that he denies discovering anything. He remembered a path, a practice, a metaphorical, metaphysical, metaspiritual place that we can bear witness to, that we can remember, that we can rediscover, that we can reawaken, that we can reimagine. And that place is it Rumi or Sufi? One of the poets said, meet me in that place beyond good and bad, beyond up and down, etc., etc. And the hang-up, the obstacle, because there's no attainment, right? There's no striving. There's a letting go of. And it's the one thing we fear the most. We're so retentive. We're so caught up in clinging to things, to our stuff, to our people and relationships and pretend ideated relationships and our imaginings. And there's a healthy way to do that, to cultivate those in our life, our lives. And there's an unhealthy way to hoard and gather and cling to and never be satisfied by, because more is never enough. And if there's any hope, as Alan Watts in his, and of course others, right? I don't mean to harp on Alan Watts exclusively. I'm just a big fan, and I think y'all should go read it. And if that isn't clear now, it'll be patently obvious once you've listened to a handful more episodes. He does the least likely thing, the thing that serious Buddhists and Zenists throw right the fuck out the window. And that's that he uses words to transport you beyond a cognitive, intellectual understanding and into that mercurial, I never can pronounce that correctly until I've warmed up really severely and said it several times in anticipation of saying it, mercurial, lucid imagining place. It's no accident that the imagination gets poo-pooed after puberty. And we'll have to put a pin in it there and make a whole special episode about the imagination. For as promised, these segments, entitled Today's Nugget of Zen, shall remain on the briefer side of things. To recap, to review the quote, I know I've already read it, but let it plant the seeds it bears deep in your soul. Quote, Zen is a liberation from time. There is no other time than this instant, past, future, abstractions without any concrete reality. Until this has become clear, it seems that our life is all past and future, the present nothing more than a hairline that divides them. By awakening to the instant, one sees that the reverse is true. Past and future are fleeting illusions. The present is eternally real. May you find your way home, back to that eternally real place. Namaste, dear friends and listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. And remember, folks, these aren't just crazy ideas I'm sharing with you. I am convinced, for various reasons I've already discussed, and I'm sure I will discuss yet again, convinced fervently that there is indeed a call to spiritual action, and that we are all prompted to do that internal spiritual work as described by such enlightened individuals as Buddha, as Yeshua, etc., etc. So, if you're meditating, double down, shake it up, explore new practices. If you've never meditated before, jump around. I have a couple of episodes that are sort of like guided meditations, but also just get on a meditation timer, like Insight Timer, or just sit in silence and get on it, friends. And now, we return you to your regularly scheduled advertising commercials.